outcomes through communications and relationships. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Sandra. Just as we're waiting for folk to come in, could I ask you in the chat if you could introduce yourself, your name, your role, organisation you work in, and what you were hoping to get out of this session. And what Sandra and I will try and do is make sure we've covered as many points as possible. There is a chance at the end of this community of practice to have some questions, some discussion, and even just thinking, reflecting on the points that we've heard, looking at how we have a changing and evolving, or we have changes and evolution within Dorset and within nationally within the health service. So if you can just pop that in the chat as you come in, so your name, role, organisation you work in, and what you're hoping to get out of the session. That's brilliant. Thank you. Next slide, please, Sandra. So as you may have noticed, we've hit the record button. We're going to record the community of practice. So it's a resource for you and for others that weren't able to attend today. And that will be available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So you don't have to scribble down lots of notes. These slides have been written in such a way you can again use them as a resource. So those will be made available to you on future NHS. Screenshots from this event will be used for our future communications and our reports. So if you don't want to appear in any of those screenshots, please just add in the chat and we'll make sure that you're not included as a photo. And if you use social media, if you use LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms, please do message about this event, and it's a hashtag Dorset Innovation Hub. We've got a quick session today, so we're going to get us finished within the hour. So we will finish or aim to finish by 1:55. And I'm just trying to speak and let people in as we go. We've got one of our trainers down today, so it's just Sandra and I for this session. So next slide, please, Sandra. Thank you. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Sarah Chesel. I'm Head of Research and Innovation at NHS Dorset, and I'm the lead for the Dorset Innovation Hub. Unfortunately, Michelle can't be with us today. She sends her best wishes and looks forward to hearing about what folk thought about the community of practice. And coming across to you, Sandra.
So hello everyone, my name is Sandra Courtier and I work with Sarah NHS Dorset as the Research and Innovation Programme Manager.
Thanks, Sandra. And just we want to just recognise the contribution of Rick Perry, who's the delivery lead at Place for Dorset Council, who helped collaboratively put this training together. So huge thanks to Rick, who again can't be with us today. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sandra. So today in this community of practice, we invited you to find out more about what does influencing mean, influencing styles and strategies, and practical tips and tools to help support you. So next slide, thank you. Just very quickly, just a brief overview of the Dorset Innovation Hub. So the Dorset Innovation Hub is made up of NHS partners, higher education, local organisations, including the Voluntary and Community Sector Assembly, local authorities and Dorset Police, and also our wider partners, so Health Innovation Wessex, Wessex Health Partners, the NIHR ARC Wessex, the National Institute of Health Research Applied Research Collaborative, and that's from Wessex, and the South West Central Research Delivery Network. And if we can just go to the next slide, just so you've got a little bit of a feel of what we do. So on the left-hand side, we've got our programme group from the Dorset Innovation Hub, and you might recognise members. We meet on a bi-monthly basis, and the programme group members oversee on behalf of the organisation key priority projects for innovation that we work on together, receiving reports, but really taking that collaborative, strategic approach, trying to bring Dorset together as a cohesive system that is working to improve the outcomes and experience for our population. And then the innovation core team, you can see on the right-hand side there, we're small but perfectly formed. We all provide practical facilitative support and advice for innovation projects, working with sponsors, the senior responsible officers on key priority projects. And we also work towards realising the strategy, and this community of practice is part of the education programme that we run with Health Sciences University. Next slide, please. Thank you. And just a small plug for some of the resources that we have available for you. Again, as you get these slides through on Future NHS for you to access, just click on the links and it takes you to our public website where we've got case studies, training opportunities, resources, our newsletters, blogs and events, just so you can find out more about what's happening with regards to innovation in Dorset. And if you want to email us, then please do at dorsetinnovationhub@nhs.dorset.nhs.uk. Next slide, please. So just before I hand over to Sandra, who's going to deliver this piece of training, huge thank yous to everyone for putting in the chat your name, your role, the organisation, and also thinking what you want to get out through the session. So we'll just try and pick up those points for you. So thank you. Over to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So as we've mentioned, today's Community of Practice event is based on the topic of influencing. And just wanted to start the session with a quote. And this quote is from Anita Roddick, who is the founder of The Body Shop. I won't read the quote verbatim, I'll let you read the slide. But just liked this quote because it reminds us that the actions of everyone have the potential to exert a significant influence, and that individuals are never too small to make a difference. It also encourages us to recognise the power of everyone's contribution, regardless of their size, their status, or the resources. And I think for a session that's based on a topic like influencing, I think one of the key things to do to start with is talk about what the term influencing actually means and what does it mean to you. So I'd be really grateful if you would add to the chat your thoughts on that question. So for you, what does the term influencing mean?
You're looking for a quick fire response there, Sandra, in the chat?
Yes, please.
So we've got some coming through. Bringing someone around to your way of thinking, influence to direct, bringing about a change in opinion or action, persuading, sharing ideas so that others understand. Some really good points coming through here. Shaping
Yes.
others' actions or thoughts, informing people with facts as well is coming through.
Yeah, I think someone's also flagged that it could be something positive and it could be something negative. It could go in both directions.
Absolutely. Understanding your audience and knowing how to best communicate with them to understand your perspective. It's a great one from Carly.
Thank you ever so much, everyone, for your thoughts on that. Some really lovely ones coming through. And what we've chosen to do is take the definition as it is in the Oxford English Dictionary for influencing. And in the dictionary, it defines influencing as the effect that someone or something has on the way a person thinks, behaves, or on the way that something works or develops. But I think when we're talking about trying to understand terms like influencing, it's also important to reflect on what the term is not about as well as what it is about. So thinking about what influencing might not be about, some of the things that came to mind were terms like authority, hierarchy and manipulation, but also things like persuasion for persuasion's sake and convincing people through pressure. And then taking that a step further from the definition to think about why influencing matters, we rarely have direct control, or very probably never really have direct control over everything that we need to be able to get work or projects or tasks done. So instead, we need to be able to influence the gatekeepers to those things that are outside of our direct control. And when we think about that health and care setting as well, influencing could be seen as particularly important because in that setting we do particularly value qualities such as autonomy, professional judgment, and collaboration. So I suppose the first, it might sound very obvious, but the first key question is about knowing who those people are that we should be looking to influence. So who are those gatekeepers? Who are those stakeholders that we need to try and influence? And when we talk about stakeholder analysis tools and frameworks, our go-to for this is always the CUSA tools that are published by Aqua. I won't go into detail in this. I'm going to just give a very brief overview and a signpost. But essentially that stakeholder identification process starts typically with a brainstorming exercise. And if you can, that brainstorming exercise is always best done as a small group activity. And the object of that session is to generate a list of all the possible people or groups that are likely to be affected by your project or your work task. And sometimes thinking when we're doing that brainstorming can get a bit blocked, and there are various frameworks out there to help unblock that thinking. The one on the slide is the 9 C's framework, which is a classification system from industry, but it's still quite helpful within that health and care setting, and it can help to just generate a really broad range of possible stakeholders. And then through that exercise, what we normally get is a nice long list, and don't let that put you off, don't let that deter you. That's what you're after, that sort of really good long list of potential stakeholders. And then once we've done that brainstorming exercise and we've got that long list, what we then need to be able to do is prioritize which of our stakeholders we need to be focusing our time and our energy on when we are thinking about who we need to influence. And again, from the AquaCUSA tools, there's a stakeholder prioritization grid, and that's a really great tool for enabling us to do that. So the grid is made up of those 2 axes you can see on the screen. So you've got your horizontal axes, which is the level of impact, and your vertical axes, which is the level of power. That then gives you the 4 quadrants to the grid, and each quadrant would differ in terms of level of impact and level of power, with that top right-hand engage quadrant being the section where you've got the highest level of impact and the highest level of power. And then what you're trying to do with that long list of stakeholders that you've got is trying to assign each of those to one of those 4 quadrants. And then that gives you an informed idea of where you need to be focusing your time and your energy when you're thinking about who you need to be influencing. But also when we are deciding who the key people are that we need to engage with, it's also worth bearing in mind that the people we think we need to influence, so those formal leaders, those decision makers, aren't necessarily the people who carry the most influence. And sometimes a wider question that we should ask ourselves is, who do the decision makers and those formal leaders, who do they listen to and who do they trust? So in other words, who are they influenced by? And if we try and keep that type of questioning in mind when we're thinking about stakeholder identification, it just lets us to think a bit more widely and a bit more strategically. So next, just wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking about and talking through some of the psychology-based theories around influencing. So when we talk about influencing, we're talking about trying to understand human behavior And so those psychology-based theories can be really helpful with this. And one of the most popular theories that's linked to influencing is Cialdini's 7 Principles of Influencing. So Cialdini is a social psychologist, and he first published this work in 1984. And at that time, it was published as 6 Principles of Influencing. And then it was updated in 2016 with the addition of unity as the 7th principle. It is a popular theory because it has been able to translate quite complex psychological principles into something that can be applied practically. The original research that the theory is based in was conducted in a marketing and sales environment, but that theory, or the theory that's come from that, is applicable beyond that setting because it does tap into some fundamental aspects of human psychology. So if we just go very briefly through each of the 7 principles in turn. So the first one is reciprocity. So this is based on the idea that people tend to do something in return when someone does something for them, so that people feel obligated to return favours. So if we're thinking about sort of a workplace setting, it might be things like, it's not necessarily those big grand gifts or big grand gestures, it's those smaller gestures like sharing knowledge or sharing expertise, maybe providing some useful tools or resources that you are aware of, or if a colleague is under particular work pressure, offering to help and support. And then principle 2 is commitment and consistency. And this is based on the idea that people strive for consistency in their own behaviour and their own beliefs. So once they've made a certain choice, that they tend to stick with that choice and they will adjust their behaviour accordingly. So again, if we think about workplace settings, if people are signed up and working to, for example, core organisational values, if your project or initiative clearly aligns with those, then you are already tapping into an existing commitment and consistency that someone has there. Principle 3 is social proof, and this is the based on the idea that people often look to others to determine how they should be behaving. So if we can show evidence that others are exhibiting a certain behaviour, that can in turn convince people to do the same. So this may be through things like peer-led training, or it might be through case study publication, or if we've got early adopters for a particular innovation, then showcasing those early adopters. Principle 4 is authority. So based on the idea that people are more likely to listen to and take notice of individuals who are considered authoritative and knowledgeable. So maybe thinking about the influence of things like maybe clinical leadership, or the weight that may come with something like NICE guidance or CQC recommendations, or if an innovation has some solid evidence-backed research behind it. So principle 5 is scarcity. So again, this is based on the idea that people are sensitive to a shortage of something. So when something's presented as limited or as rare, its value increases in our perception. And there were lots of really good examples of that sort of playing out during the COVID lockdown. So if we think about how that might apply to sort of a work setting, it might be things like limited rounds of funding, or it might be things like limited slots for a pilot study, for example. Principle 6 is liking. So liking is based on the idea that people are more likely to do something for people they like. So in a professional context, that sort of building liking requires authentic relationship building. So being able to find that genuine common ground, showing interest in others, and offering sincere appreciation for others' contributions. And then the last principle, principle 7, is unity, so that shared identity. And that's based on the idea that people tend to identify and feel connected with others who share similar characteristics, beliefs, and goals. So again, thinking about our sort of work settings, if we can identify projects as shared system priorities, if we can incorporate co-designing methods or highlight collective wins, that all plays to that principle of unity and helps us to have that influence. So although Cialdini's 7 Principles of Influencing is a very popular theory, it also does have criticism attached to it, and I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. And the main sort of basis for the criticism is around concerns about ethics and manipulation, and recognizing that there is a very fine line between persuasion and influencing and manipulation, and that principles like these shouldn't be seen as shortcuts to manipulation, and that they shouldn't be used as surface level tactics. Also, that the principles might present an overgeneralization and a lack of situational sensitivity. So we do need to acknowledge that certain principles aren't equally effective in all situations. So you need a degree of flex to be able to use the principle that best suits the scenario that you're in. And also there are cultural limitations, because the research that the theory is based in has largely been done in Western countries. So all that being said, it's good to be aware of these principles, but we need to be making sure that we treat principles like these as guiding considerations rather than scripts, and that we're using principles like these to support autonomy rather than overriding it. So moving slightly from the psychology-based theory around influencing, how can we use that theory then to help us to develop some strategies to practically use some of that in our work lives? So from the psychology, one of the things that is really very evident is that trust is such a key foundation stone in this, and that trust creates the conditions for influence to work. And when we talk about trust, trust is something that's built over time. It's built through consistency of interaction by things like visible fairness, active listening, showing respect, and giving opportunities for shared decision making. And when we've got that solid foundation of trust there, this then also opens up the opportunity for conversations that allow us to have insights and reveal other people's perspectives. And that might be perspectives around their particular pressures, maybe their fears, maybe what motivates them. And all these sort of insights help to enhance our empathy and our understanding. And that's really important when we talk about influencing, because when we understand what somebody values or fears or where their priorities sit, it means that we can communicate in ways that do genuinely resonate. It also means that we are less likely to have misinterpretation, and it reduces that sort of assumptions. And it also enables us to frame our communication and our messaging in a way that will hopefully genuinely connect with that person. So looking at point 3 is around that emotional appeal. So research has shown that emotional influence can be more effective than pure logical arguments when we are looking at organizational settings. So when we evaluate situations, we do so both through reason, but we also do so through emotion. So this means that personal stories can trigger particular influence mechanisms that data on its own can't. Also, when we talk about personal stories, stories are much easier to process, much easier to accept, and much easier to understand. And it helps us to tap into that that principle of social proof through using that sort of lived experience lens. And then point 4 is reciprocity. So again, it's not about those big gifts, those big gestures, rather it's those strategies that allow us to have those everyday small consistent gestures that we try to build into our daily routine. So again, things like sharing knowledge and expertise, sharing resources, providing support. And then point 5, strategy 5 is around communication. So when we're talking about influencing, effective influence is really reliant on good communication. And when we're talking about communication, we're talking about things like clarity, framing, and predictability in language. So with clarity, if we've got clarity there, it means we're reducing ambiguity and we're facilitating that increase in trust. Framing, so if we've got those perspectives in place, it means we can frame our communication appropriately to change and shape how people might feel and react. But also thinking about predictability in language and being mindful that people do respond automatically to linguistic cues. So things like expecting to hear a reason after the word because. And the use of the word because is particularly important when we talk about influencing communication because it can act as a psychological trigger. So we're naturally wired to seek reasons when people make requests of us or ask us to do particular behaviours or make particular decisions. So when we hear that sort of word because, our brains then shift into a justification mode and become much more receptive to the message. And then lastly, thinking about strategies that help us to involve others. So again, tapping into that principle of unity. And if we can involve others, then that helps us to increase commitment. And this might be again around co-designing methods or co-designing implementation plans, but those things that increase that shared sense of ownership and then that increased sense of ownership then having a positive impact on the level of commitment. So when we're involved in shaping decisions, we then become much more committed to them. And that involvement also has that positive impact of increasing clarity, reducing misunderstanding, and it also helps us to build trust as well as shift from a more passive state to a more active state. So before moving away from the theory side of things, wanted to really briefly just acknowledge the role of emotional intelligence when we talk about influencing. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, we're talking about the ability to recognize and understand our own emotions, but also those emotions of other people. And models of emotional intelligence quite often break it down into 5 key components. So those components of self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. And that sort of maturity of emotional intelligence is one of the strongest predictors for the ability to be able to influence, as well as being a strong predictor for things like leadership effectiveness and the quality of communication. So I've done quite a lot of talking so far, so wanting to come back to an activity and involve you guys a little bit. And thinking about the points that we've discussed so far, around influencing and some of the psychology around influencing. Wanted to do a short activity to try and apply some of those in practice. So for this activity, we're setting a scenario where you need to convince a colleague or a set of colleagues that they need to attend a training session. And for step 1 of the activity, in the chat, could you write just a short message that is professional, but a message that's guaranteed not to influence someone to attend the training? So you can make it as unhelpful as you like, but just keep it professional, please.
I'm sure people are just thinking about that short
Yes.
message. And I like the way you added twice. Keep it professional.
Well, yeah, otherwise you just never know.
Here we go. There's a course at 2 p.m. tomorrow. You should go. Dear X, you must attend the training on X date. You can go if you want to. Training at 1400-be there. Hi, there is some training going, not sure what it's like. Shall we go? So lots of points coming through. As interestingly, there's one that's written in capitals at the moment. There
Yes.
is that might be
I like,
influencing.
yes, I like that. So thinking about, like we said at the top of the session, what is influencing not? So that's sort of that exerting that authority.
Absolutely. Can you go on this course tomorrow as you need it? I suppose we have to attend this training. No idea what it is. So we've got a variety of different points coming
Yes.
through
Yeah,
there.
that's sort of not being committed to something, that's sort of on the fence in terms of whether or not it's
Yeah.
helpful.
I wonder
Okay.
if there's just a couple coming through that maybe are trying to influence rather than it being not
Well,
to influence.
in that case, they're a step ahead, because step 2 is if you could please rewrite your message. Maybe think about some of those principles I've taught through around influencing, some of those Cialdini's principles, and how perhaps could you rewrite that message so it's more likely to positively influence someone to attend that training.
And this is, of course, Sandra, a safe space where folk can write things in a
Oh,
professional
absolutely.
way. This is all about learning. Right, you've got some of the newer message. Hey, this training session looks like it could be useful. It relates to something we were chatting about a few days ago. You said you could do with some help on this. This might give you some pointers. That's a great one, I think. Would be great if you could attend this. Looks really useful. So the use of the word useful coming through. There's some training available. I've been looking into it and it looks really good. You should definitely attend. I think it would be helpful for you.
Yeah. So a lot more committed in terms of the value of the training, in terms of the
Yeah,
value added for the person going. So that sort of motivation to go is definitely coming through a lot stronger in the second messages.
absolutely.
Also that sort of value that's adding to the team. So that's very much that sort of unity and doing something for that collective.
Yes, Greta said, I'm aware you wanted to learn more about the ways how to influence stakeholders on X project. This might be useful and is delivered online, so very convenient to join. Yeah, there's some great points coming through.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, everyone, for taking part in that activity, and hopefully yeah, sort of reflecting on what's changed between message 1 and message 2, and some of those sort of points on perhaps how some of those principles could be used in communication when we're thinking about those influencing principles. So we've talked about some of the psychology-based theory around influencing and about how we can use some of that theory to develop influencing strategies. But what we like to do with these community of practice sessions is also think a bit about practical tips and practical tools, so things we can actively do to help perhaps with influencing. And going back to the start of the session, and that stakeholder identification piece, it's about, I suppose, that practical tip number 1 is about taking the time to do that stakeholder mapping exercise. And I know it sounds incredibly obvious, but to be able to successfully influence, we need to know who it is that we should be influencing. And then once we know who those stakeholders are, we can take the time to get to know those stakeholders, develop our understanding of their motivations, their interests, their concerns, perhaps also find out who influences their opinions. But I suppose also being mindful when we're talking about stakeholder identification exercises, that this can also be quite a fluid process and can change over time. So at different time points in a project, there'll be certain people that will move in and out of being key stakeholders, for example. So again, tip 2, sticking with that stakeholder piece, and making sure that we're targeting our time and our energy towards those key influencers. So our capacity is limited. We do have multiple demands on our time and our energy. So we want to make sure that we're using our time and our energy as best as we can, and it's targeted towards those key people that we should be influencing. So using tools like that stakeholder prioritization grid that we mentioned at the start of the session, but also if you look at the CUSA tools for stakeholder analysis, there's also a readiness for change matrix in there, which allows us to map our thoughts on where stakeholders sit in terms of their opinion on your piece of work or your project. So are they in favour, are they neutral, or are they opposed? And then that just allows us to hone down even further who the key stakeholders are, but perhaps also who the key stakeholders are that hold a less favourable opinion on the piece of work that you're trying to complete. And we've talked a lot about the importance of clear communication and how clear communication is such a fundamental component of effective influencing. As we've talked about, that clear communication helps us to reduce ambiguity, it increases trust, and it can change and shape how people think, feel, and act. So to support us in communicating as clearly and as consistently as possible, then tip number 3 is about considering putting together a communications plan. And it can be a very basic, simple plan that is about who needs the information, when they need the information, and how they need the information. Or it can be a much more detailed communications plan that includes details on the stakeholders, like what their level of interest is, their level of influence, what's important to them, what the best strategy might be for engaging that stakeholder. And when you get the slides for today's session, you'll see that there's a link there to the our Dorset project management templates, and there's a really nice communications plan template in that website. So if you're after a good example of a communications plan, then I would recommend having a look at that link. And then building trust. So we've talked again, as well as communication, we've talked a lot about how effective influencing is built on that solid foundation of trust. And when we talk about trust, it's something that's built through consistency over time, through that visible fairness, through things like active listening, showing respect, shared decision making. So practically, what should we be doing or looking to do as activities that help us to build that trust? And it might be activities like team building exercises which help us to get to know and understand each other and perhaps strengthen those relationships. Maybe it's about building reputation by making sure we keep promises, or if we can't keep promises, being transparent as to why. Building trust by making sure we're communicating openly, honestly, showing that genuine interest, but also I think remembering the power of authenticity. So being yourself and allowing other colleagues to see that too. And then finally, thinking about that influencing principle of unity and commitment, making sure we recognize and celebrate success, but that we're doing so in a genuine way. So this helps to boost morale and engagement, but it also helps to build those key cornerstones of trust and commitment that we've talked about. So finally, knowing also that people do value practical tools from these community of practice sessions, wanted to highlight another of the CUSA tools from Aqua called the influence model. And this model is a 4-part framework for managing change by levering what they see as being 4 key levers that influence someone's behaviour. And essentially, the model says that when these 4 key levers are activating well, when they work well together, then you've got a higher chance of being able to influence in the way that you're looking to. So those 4 key levers being motivation, so the I want to do it, and then the ability, so I can do it. The third one being role modeling, the I see other people doing it, and then lastly, the environment and the system. So the system itself actually supports me to do it. So this influence model can be used at any stage in an improvement project, in an innovation project, and it's there to support people with that sort of influencing piece. It's there to sort of stimulate thinking. So you sort of define the behavior you're wanting to influence, map what's already there in terms of those 4 levers. Through that mapping, you can identify where the gaps are, putting together then an action plan to address those gaps, and then delivering that action plan and monitoring the impact of that to see if it's had the effect that you need it to have. So we started with a quote, so we're coming in a circular fashion back to a quote to end us off. I'm particularly liking this quote because again it builds on that role modeling lever that we've just seen in the influence model. And this is from Albert Schweitzer, who is a philosopher and theologian who won the 1952 Nobel Peace Prize. And when we're thinking about role modeling, he says that example is not the main thing in influencing others, it is the only thing. And I quite liked this quote because it does really strongly highlight the powerful role that role modeling does play, and perhaps the underused role that it has within influencing. So before handing back to Sarah for questions and any discussion points, just to summarize, when we talk about influencing, seeing influencing as that skill that combines those abilities to communicate well. It's about that emotional intelligence, but it's also about that wider strategic thinking. When we're building our ability to influence, we need to be focusing on those key cornerstones of developing trust, building those relationships, making sure we understand the perspectives of others, and that we have that awareness of those influencing techniques, but we're using them appropriately depending on the scenario that we're in. And when we are thinking about influencing, there isn't a magic golden bullet with this. It's about integrating these techniques and these principles and this learning into our day-to-day routine. And rather than thinking about it as a one-shot thing, it's about seeing every interaction we have as a touch point that helps us to build on current and future influence. And then when we're thinking about the techniques and the tools, again, it's not about a single technique that will solve all the problems for us and it will be the technique we need for every situation where we need that influence. It's about having that awareness of the different techniques and tools that are out there and using the one that's best suited to the situation that we're in at that particular point in time. So handing back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And that was absolutely fascinating. And there's so many points there. I was scribbling down points as we went. But just as we give we're going to have five-ish minutes for questions, just giving folk a chance to raise hands or please pop in the chat your question. There were quite a few points that came through when we asked you right at the beginning, what were you hoping to get out of the session? So there's one just as we're waiting for hands to go up that I'll go to. And Rowena Goldthorpe, if you want to open mic and talk to the point. Rowena is doing the electronic health record programme at Dorset County, hoping for insights that might contribute towards imminent mass stakeholder engagement. I was just thinking as Sandra spoke about how actually, Rowena, there's a chance that you could look at that programme of work and think about, you know, do you have certain points already built in and what are your levels of influence with the programme? Is there anything additional you could do? Is there any further work that could be done? Rowena, do you want to come in? Are you still with us?
I'm still with you. Yes, very much so. Thank you. Thanks for bringing me in. Yes,
Okay.
I mean, we've started on a big journey already. We are just at the stage that we have contract signature on a supplier for our electronic health record programme. But our stakeholder engagement started quite some time back because it's been a programme that's been in development for some time. So there's a lot of stakeholder mapping that we've already begun, but there's still a lot more that we can take away, certainly from slides that you've shared today, the matrix and, you know, categorizing people more. I think one of the big things that I've taken away from stakeholder engagement is it's the people, as you were talking about, not always the most obvious influencers. It's the ones that sometimes have more challenging opinions possibly, or the outliers that are quite often the ones that we need to put some bigger focus on from time to time. But it's an ever-changing platform for sure. Whether that's answered what you've asked.
Yes, yeah, no, I just thought yours was a brilliant point, and I thought and you know, there was a theme coming through from folk, and I thought if we turn it on our head, when we look at projects, when we look at programs that we're doing, if we are considering all these points, we are trying to get the best we possibly can out of our projects, our programs. And for me, every day is a learning day. We learn from one another. It's that reciprocity, isn't it? But it's actually about what we do with the information. So we're trying to get the best out of our projects. We're trying to get the best outcome for our population and experiences, or you know, it's for staff as well. But looking at that, how can we influence? So I'm glad that there's some takeaways from you as well. Thank you. Just coming to Jenny, who's popped in the chat. I think the key takeaway for me is to integrate this process into our daily routine, thinking of every interaction you have as a touch point for current and future influence, which has got a lot of thumbs up, which is fantastic. Jenny, totally agree with you. And just for time's sake, I've got no hands raised, but do look back when you have a mo after this event at points that folk have brought in. Some key points I beg your pardon, I would like folk to think about is that Sandra has really created a framework here with the team. So with Rick, with Michelle, really encouraging us to take time to prepare and give you and your team the best chance to influence, build that trust, consider that reciprocity, work in unity, collaboration with that shared sense of ownership, considering the stakeholders and mapping and communicating effectively and building that trust. So it's that trust. How do we genuinely work as a system together to get the best outcomes that we want? So coming to next slide, I'm just mindful of time. We've got just a few more slides to come, not many, but 1, 2, 3, 4 slides. So this will be in your pack when you have a look at this on Future NHS. So these are key resources and tools that will help guide you. These are the ones that Sandra's highlighted to you and a couple of others. So a great resource pack there for you. And then coming to the next slide, Sandra, I know we haven't got Michelle with us. Are you able to pop the evaluation in the chat, or?
I'm going to try and launch the poll now, and hopefully
Brilliant.
that will work. Is that coming up for people?
It is indeed. So if we could just ask if you could just spend just a couple of minutes. This is free at the point of contact. Dorset Innovation Hub is hosted by NHS Dorset, and we just really appreciate your feedback. So please do rate for each of the questions. There's 6 quick questions coming through, and if you just press the right hand arrow when you've chosen, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being strongly agree coming through, that would be really helpful. And then what did you value most from this session as well? And then I've got just 2 more slides, and then we can get you on your way for the rest of the afternoon. We've got a number of responses coming through. And Sandra, if we could just have the next slide. Thank you. So just winding up now, just thinking about finishing this session. What we do with these community of practice is we are encouraging you to use tools to get the best possible opportunities. In this case, it's about influencing through communication. There is a drop-in session for you. There's a half-an-hour session. Come with your questions, your thoughts from what you've seen today. Think about your project, and Sandra and I will be there, and we'll just use the time to be able to discuss those points with you. And it's also about spreading the word about the community of practice sessions. So do have a look on that link that's at the bottom of the slide that says events, and that will take you to the next events we have. And we've got just a few more responses coming through, please, for the evaluation. So thank you. Please do complete that. And then a mini advert for our next community of practice. So this is being run by the NHS Dorset Inward Investment team, Catherine Misen and the team. So getting bid ready. So thinking about funder requirements, generic supporting documentation, including checklists, how to explore potential opportunities regarding bids, grants, and a real opportunity, as always, to have discussions and questions. So if that's of interest, please do join us for that session. Please do book on. So unless there's anything else, with a couple of minutes spare, huge thank you, Sandra, for doing the session today. I found that really useful. And thank you to everyone for participating, both in the actual activities, but also, you know, in the chat saying what you wanted to get out of the session. Challenge back to you. You asked that you wanted to get certain things out of the session. If you feel you've managed to receive that information, take that back to your workplace. How are you going to incorporate that into your work, into your activities, and how are you going to influence your colleagues to do the same? So huge thank yous, and signing off. Have an amazing rest of your afternoon. Take care.
Thank you very much all.